There is nothing soft or silken about the North. The lives of men and women are as challenging as the climate and lands in which they dwell. For generations, the Erlings of Denmark have taken their dragon-proud ships across the seas, raiding the lands of the Kengale and Anglican peoples, leaving fire and death behind. But times change, even in the North. In a tale woven with consummate artistry, people of all three cultures find the threads of their life unexpectedly brought together. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Hemvar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Gavriel Kay's The Last Light of the Sun. The Last Light of the Sun is a 2004 standalone historical fantasy novel, fantasy that uses a secondary world that is heavily inspired by historical events. In this case, it is the Viking Danish armies invading the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and Alfred the Great's defense of Wessex in England, or at least it's vaguely about that. The novel is divided into three parts. It starts with a silk dress merchant, Faraz ibn Bakir, from the Caliphate of Al-Rasan, in the pagan north of the barbarians. It's the mention of this caliphate and Sarantium that tells me all of Kay's fictional old world are the same fictional old world, and these barbarians are prone to killing and burning their dead, lord upon ships, is at least what Bakir notices. And these are Earlings, something like that. They're analogous to early medieval Germanic peoples, specifically Norse speakers, and they sell fur and amber. It's an experience akin to that from Ibn Fadlan's experience among the Rus, as told in the Land of Darkness, that last stuff being actual historical. Bairn Thurkelson steals a horse and seeks for a Volva and her Sather for aid. He does not rage like a berserker, even in drunkenness. His father did, and he expects to die for being a horse thief, and he thinks he'll probably even get the Blood Eagle. It turns even darker very swiftly. People lie or used. It's very adult. Chapter 2 introduces Alan and Di. They're Britons, or what are called Kengale here. They are going cattle raiding. It doesn't turn out as planned. This gets them mixed up with Cronin, Hugh, cleric of the Kengale, Bryn of Brynwell, and they're called Erlings of Bane, and Enid Bryn, his wife. Rhiannon is the daughter of these last two, and based off her name, you get a semblance of her already. Finally, we get the Anglican, which are essentially the English. This deals with Alfred's kingdom after his war against the Danes, but he's called Eldred here. I don't hear the story with Welsh invoked so much, so the Kengale make a nice addition in Kay's story. It saves two people that deal with Jod and their people's old beliefs before converting. We get flashbacks of his struggle as a new king, but mostly he is old and his kingdom is doing well, and he encourages scholarship at his court, just as King Alfred did. Those unaware with historical Alfred should know he is highly regarded because of the defense of his country and eventual victory, but also his love of knowledge that his country had mostly lost because of extended Viking harrying and, burning and killing of learned people. So this has authentic magic, which is cool. It's kind of as you'd expect from a historical setting: herbs, chants, animals. It's also sex. Not always a lovey-dovey kind. And the characters are the best part of the story, though. They feel real. They're gullible and frustrated and desperate, and, you get to recognize some irony here, and they do too. Their crimes have consequences that many feel, and law is paramount, but not followed over much, leaving exile and wereguilds to be paid, new homes to be found, and death as well. The songs are another strength. Kay continues in Tolkien's footsteps. Unsurprisingly here, it's one that many don't use, and that tends to sadden me when I'm looking at the fantasy genre. At least if they do use it, it's not done very well, so maybe that's why a lot of people don't use it. The pacing also works well. It doesn't start in a great sword action, but the conflict is evident from page 1 up until the swords are actually used, and it just gets more conflict from there. It also feels quite magical, and the Celtic parts in particular. And another strength is the emotion. This tied into the characters. Well, maybe not as subtle as Tolkien. Kay expresses longing for the past, regret, and whatever else, right, deftly. He also does this with action and sexuality. Nothing out there so much, but neither of those are things Tolkien focused on much. Kay captures the big picture in a few ways and plays with themes deep in human minds and tied to our reasonings of existence. We have things like Ingavin is Ing or Freyr, Thunir is Thor or Thunor, Jod and his sun disk seems to be the Christian analogy here. I also like the dog that reminds me of one in Rosemary Sutcliffe's Sword at Sunset. There's also an Ivar character, essentially Ivar the Boneless. And there's Jormsvik for Jorvik or Jorvik, which is modern-day York. I did not like the referring to private parts as a sex. That's just a weird thing to me. I don't really understand that because that just seems like you're avoiding it, but really not. Like that's just weird. Just, just commit and say actual anatomy here. And this was my first K novel, and I chose this one because it was my studies in early medieval England seemed to line up. I think I'll actually try A Song for Arbonne next because it's a fictionalization of the Albigensian Crusade, which I also enjoy with old Occitan consos and whatever. My one complaint, as I record these reviews months, 3 to 4 months after reading the book, is that this book was largely forgettable. Reading my notes jogged a lot of memories, but even though I enjoyed my reading, because I'm not going to say this is bad, I enjoyed my reading, I do think it just maybe isn't his best work, but also this quarter turn to the fantastic seems just silly. This should just be a historical novel. This should be set in our world, not some almost our world, right? I've read plenty of historical novels that are great historical fantasies, and even historical novels that change more history but are still our world. And for some reason, this isn't, and that just seems silly on Kay's part. There's no excuse for it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry. If anyone can come up with a good defense as to why this is a secondary world, please come up to me and tell me what it is, because I can't see any reason, and I feel like you're going to be wrong if you have a defense for it. I think it's just silly. This should be in our world. This should not be some secondary world. Even something like Eliot's Crown of Stars, which is very obviously medieval inspired, works great as a secondary world because there's a lot of changes. Kay doesn't do like Jack for changes here. This should not be a secondary world. Anyways, that's a kind of a pet peeve I found after reading this book. I'll probably have that same problem with his other books, especially since I think the real world's a pretty interesting place, and he does too. But he doesn't want to tell you about it. He wants to tell you about his slightly modified versions. Anyways, again, that's just my pet peeve. But Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.